Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is my review of the Panasonic Lumix S9, a compact full-frame camera with 24 megapixels, 6K open gate video, IBIS, and easy access to picture styles and effects. The smallest model in the S series to date, the S9 is available in jet black, crimson red, dark olive, and night blue. I tested a pre-production blue version running firmware 1.0, which is your favourite colour. Announced in May 2024 and initially costing around $1,500 or pounds, the S9 on the left shares the same core innards of the S5 II on the right, but slices off its viewfinder and simplifies some features to become more affordable, lighter, and smaller in every dimension. At the time of the S9's launch, the S5 II was already over a year older and enjoying some discounting as such, with body prices available from around $1,800 or £1,650. I'll mention the differences between them throughout this review. For me though, the closest camera to the S9, at least in concept, is Sony's ZV-E1, which is basically a viewfinderless version of the A7S Mark III. Ignoring the lenses here, you can see the S9 and ZV-E1 bodies are actually very similar in size and weight, but with quite different sensors inside. The ZV-E1 inherited the 12 megapixel sensor from the A7S III, that's targeted more at video alone, whereas the S9 inherits the 24 megapixel sensor from the S5 II, making it more attractive as a photo and video hybrid. Now there's many more differences between these two models that I'll also mention throughout the review, but for now, I will note that the S9's launch price is around $500 or pounds cheaper than the current street price on the ZV-E1, which is already a year older and getting some discounts. So that's a decent saving for the S9 right out of the gate, but again, there are some key differences. Let's start with design. Unlike the ZV-E1, which has a fairly chunky grip, Panasonic has opted for a completely flat front on the S9. That's luckily paired with a decent thumb rest on the rear, allowing you to hold it more comfortably and easily than it looks. But if you'd like more to wrap your fingers around, Small Rig offers an L-shaped grip accessory that screws into the bottom of the camera and makes it much more comfortable to hold. I reckon it also really improves the looks too. Now I don't know the exact price of this particular accessory, but Small Rig sells similar grips for other models for around $40. The next thing you'll want is a suitably small lens that matches the aesthetic of the camera, and as luck would have it, the S9 was launched alongside a new 26mm prime lens that certainly looks the part. It's less than 20mm thick and weighs just 58 grams, so barely adds to the overall package. Impressively, the combination is only 1cm thicker than a Fujifilm X100VI and a barely noticeable 25 grams heavier. As such, it's no wonder the lens is being used to market the S9, but in order to achieve that size, this lens has involved some compromises which could rule it out for many. First, it's manual focus only, and in the absence of distance or zone markings on the barrel, you're going to be relying on focus peaking and magnified assistance in order to focus it properly. Even at f8, I found I needed to magnify the view by double tapping the screen before the peaking became sufficiently accurate to nail the focus. Now it's not a difficult process, but it's obviously slower than using an autofocus lens. Secondly, it has a disappointingly slow f8 aperture, greatly limiting the chance for shallow depth of field effects and forcing you to use high ISOs in low light. But what makes the aperture particularly frustrating is that it's fixed at f8, unable to close any smaller, which makes achieving motion-friendly shutter speeds for video in daylight a bit of a challenge, especially since there's no filter thread, nor even a lens cap for that matter. And third, the focal length's not that useful, a bit too wide for general photography, but not quite wide enough for most handheld vloggers. I suspect it was chosen to optimise the size and weight. Now to be fair, the optical quality isn't actually that bad, and the price is very reasonable at around $200 or pounds. Plus again, what should we expect for a lens that weighs less than 60 grams? But I do feel it's more about jumping on the next 100 bandwagon and selling a look more than a usable experience, especially for the target market. If you're after a more practical prime lens with a larger aperture and autofocus that's still reasonably compact, consider one of Sigma's I-series lenses for L-mount, available in a variety of focal lengths, including a nice 20mm f2 that's ideal for vlogging. I've got reviews of most of them if you're interested. Or for the hipsters among us, and I count myself as one, how about pairing the S9 with a vintage SLR pancake lens, like the rather tasty Nikon 45mm 2.8 I picked up for about £120. Sure, it's manual focus again, but the aperture is much larger than the 26mm f8, and I think it looks pretty classy on the S9. What do you think? Alternatively, there's the upcoming Lumix S 18-40 f4.5 to 6.3 zoom, obviously larger than a Pancake Prime, but still a good size match for the body and promised for later in 2024, but at an unspecified date and price at the time I made this video. But with a compelling ultra-wide to almost standard range, the 18-40 looks perfect for the S9, not to mention attractive for other L-mount bodies, so it's a bit of a shame that it wasn't ready for this camera's launch. So, in the meantime, the initial S9 kit will rely on the existing 20-60 f3.5 to 5.6, one of my favourite general purpose zooms that still starts very wide and extends a little beyond standard, but obviously loses some of the S9's compact charm. That said, in terms of range, both of Panasonic's zooms are arguably more interesting than Sony's 28-60 kit lens for the ZV-E1. Ultimately, I guess it depends how small you want either camera to be. Both are obviously more portable than bodies with viewfinder humps when fitted with the same lenses, but for me personally, cameras like the S9 and ZV-E1 are just crying out for quality compact lenses. Now I'll be showing you some sample photos and videos from not just the new 26 and older 20-60, but also a couple of Lumix S Prime lenses to demonstrate the potential for shallow depth of field effects, as well as from my vintage Nikon 45. Right, let's get on with the body tour, starting with the top panel, which employs a shorter version of the S5 II's mode dial, with a power collar around it. Alongside are an exposure compensation button, movie record button, and the shutter release with a finger dial around it. While it's possible to start recording video in any mode, the dial's options are biased more towards stills photography, with only S&Q and manual movie dedicated to video. Contrast this with the simpler switch between photo, video and S&Q modes on Sony's ZV-E1, which to me feels more appropriate on a camera that's likely to be used equally for video as stills. Speaking of the ZV-E1, notice its more sophisticated 3-capsule microphone, which is also supplied with a wind muffler accessory, versus the more basic built-in stereo mics on the S9, which will also be more susceptible to wind noise. Both cameras of course can be used with external microphones, but Sony's more sophisticated accessory shoe also sports extra pins to work with microphones that don't actually need a separate wire. While neither camera goes as far as to include a built-in wireless microphone receiver like DJI's Osmo Pocket 3, Sony's definitely thought about audio more than Panasonic has here. You'll also notice there's no built-in flash, while sliding the cover from the shoe on the top of the camera reveals no sync pins for an external flash either. This is because the S9 only has an electronic shutter, which, on this model, does not support flash sync, but I'd still like some contacts for a neater microphone solution. Turning to the rear, you'll see the S9 has no viewfinder, so, like the ZV-E1, it uses a screen for composition only. This 3-inch panel is fully articulated, flipping out to the side and twisting up and down for easier composition at high or low angles, or forward to face you for selfies or filming pieces to camera. Neither camera has an option for an electronic viewfinder accessory, although you could always slide on a third-party optical viewfinder if you really want eye-level framing. But if you do want an EVF, you'll just be better off going for a model like the S5 II. To the side of the screen is a flat thumb wheel which can be clicked up, down, left or right to directly access the ISO, drive, AF area or white balance options. There's no joystick on this model. Above the screen you'll see 2 chunkier buttons, one for AF on and the other labelled LUT. This stands for Lookup Table, the term that's used by videographers for what are essentially filters or picture effects. LUTs are traditionally applied to videos during editing in a colour grading process, but Panasonic's real-time LUT capability allows you to bake them in at the point of capture to photos or videos, saving you time in the edit if preferred. Panasonic includes 3 sample LUTs to get you started in the S9, but you can create your own or download some from other creators via the new Lumix LAB app. You can see a selection that I've already downloaded onto the camera here. This app will soon merge with the existing Lumix app to also offer remote control of the camera, but for now it's all about downloading and applying LUTs or transferring photos and videos to your phone. So let's see it in action. With Bluetooth enabled, the S9 can automatically connect itself to your phone's Wi-Fi, and there's switchable support for 5 GHz too. Here I have the camera set to the default quality options, and auto transfer enabled for immediate copying over. So now, if I take a photo, you can see it automatically copy across a low resolution medium sized version about 5 seconds later. Switching the camera to video and recording a 6-second clip then takes about 12 seconds to subsequently copy onto my phone, and that's in 4K quality using the new 50 megabit per second MP4 Lite format, which I'll talk about in a moment. The auto transfer mode works well, but maintaining a Wi-Fi connection inevitably takes a toll on your battery. Now in my test, my phone wasn't hit too hard, but I did manage to drain a fully charged S9 pack in about 90 minutes, during which it was only transferring about 30 photos and a few short video clips. So I'd say it's better to do them all in a batch at the end of a session. As for the LUT, the download section of the app gives you access to loads of free options from various creators, including my friends Emily Lowry and Sam Holland. Do check out their channels if you haven't already. I'd already downloaded some of their LUTs onto the camera, so for this demo I'm going to show you Neutro by Kotaro Kumazawa. First download it, which takes a few seconds, then in the LUT section of the app tap on Device to find it, before selecting and then applying it to a spare library position in the camera. Here I'm going to apply it to set 13 and it's copied across. Now when you push the LUT button on the camera, you'll see the ones that you've already downloaded in the list, so just choose the effect that you're after. If you'd like to tone down or customize the LUTs though, you'll need to access them via the real-time LUT section on the photo style menu. Here you can choose the desired LUT, again by pushing the LUT button, but now you can also adjust the opacity or effectively the strength of it in 10% increments, as well as tweaking other parameters. But why isn't this available when you just push the LUT button by itself though? Wouldn't that be easier? It's also possible to apply two LUTs simultaneously, but to do that you'll first need to customize one of the My Photo styles and scroll down through the parameters. There you'll find options to choose one or two LUTs, as well as adjusting the opacity of each. I think at this point, what started as easy access has now become a bit complicated. I do like the dedicated LUT button, but feel this should also let you at least access the opacity control to turn it down a bit if preferred. But by going through the My Photo styles, you can at least set up your own preset to easily apply everything in one step later. Moving on to physical connectivity, a small door on the right hand side opens to reveal micro HDMI and USB-C ports, while a 3.5mm microphone jack is housed behind its own flap on the left side. Unlike the ZV-E1 there's no headphone jack though, and unlike Fujifilm's cameras there's no way to adapt one to the USB port either. I wonder if the target market would have preferred a headphone jack instead of an HDMI port, as I'm not sure how many are actually going to connect external recorders or make TV slideshows with it. Which would you prefer? As you'd expect, the USB port can be used for charging the battery, but annoyingly Panasonic still hasn't implemented UVC and UAC that would allow it to work as a simple standard USB webcam. Now there is a driver that you can install on your computer that allows it, but it's just not as easy as plug and play that's offered by most cameras these days, including the ZV-E1. Meanwhile, the battery and single SD card slot are housed in a compartment below, with the S9 powered by the same BLK22 pack as the S5 II, providing around 450 photos or around an hour's worth of video under SEPA conditions. Now the card slot under the camera isn't as convenient as the slot on the side of the ZV-E1 though, if you have either of them mounted on a tripod or gimbal. In my own tests, I managed to record 90 minutes worth of 4K video on the S9 before it shut down due to overheating, with about a quarter of the battery remaining. In contrast, I only managed just under an hour of 4K on the ZV-E1 before it overheated, but the S9 has a limit on individual clip lengths that I'll mention in a moment. Moving on, the S9 inherits what appears to be the same 24 megapixel full-frame sensor as the S5 II, with essentially the same photo and video quality options, including the composite high-res pixel shift mode and pre-capture bursts. Now I believe there is a minor update to support phase detect autofocus in 1080, 50 or 60p using the full sensor area, though that was strangely lacking on the S5 II. I'm pleased to report the S9 also features built-in stabilization, or IBIS for short, which in my test proved to be one of the most effective around, particularly for video. So let's have a quick vlogging demo using the 26mm lens, which I pre-focused to my face using peaking, starting with no stabilization at all. Bit wobbly, right? Next you're looking at IBIS alone, where the view has become much steadier, in fact maybe good enough. But if you'd like to iron out more wobbles, here's how it looks with additional digital stabilization set to standard. And finally with digital stabilization set to high, where there's more compensation, but in return for a more substantial crop. It's more effective, but the 26 now just isn't wide enough for handheld vlogging at arm's length. So here's the S9 fitted with the Lumix S 18mm at f1.8, where it's not only much wider, but also delivering a way shallower depth of field for nice blurring effects behind me. This is the lens you want for handheld vlogging with any Lumix S body. Like the ZV-E1, Panasonic has dumped the mechanical shutter, making the S9 an electronic camera only. Now this made sense on the Sony, as few people would be using its 12 megapixel sensor for photos, but with the S9 being more of a hybrid camera with 24 megapixels, I think it's important to understand the pros and cons of an electronic shutter. First, it's silent and vibration free, which is great for discretion, although I personally miss the sound and the haptic feedback of a mechanical shutter when taking photos. Secondly, on all but the most expensive sensors, electronic shutters can suffer from skewing artifacts with fast motion or pans, as well as banding artifacts under artificial light. Here's a quick panning test I made with the S9 using its burst mode, where you can see the skewing effect with vertical lines now leaning to the side. If you regularly shoot fast motion or take photos indoors at events, a camera with a mechanical shutter option such as the S5 II is going to be preferable. And now here's an example in 4K video where again you can trigger the skewing effect with sudden or fast movements. So the moral for video is to be gentler with your movements. Third, most sensors with electronic shutters can't synchronize the flash, at least at the kind of speeds that you want, so that's also ruled out as an option on the S9. Electronic shutter aside though, since the actual photo quality is essentially the same as the S5 II, I'm going to concentrate on what's new here and direct you to my review of that camera for a detailed report on quality if that's what you're looking for. But for now, a brief nod to the various aspect ratios, including a cinematically wide option, which fellow YouTuber Richard Wong inspired me to use. Do check out his channel too. As for video, the core modes are the same as the S5 II, so you're getting 1080 from 24 to 120p, 4K from 24 to 60p, and that's using an APS-C crop at 50 and 60p, and even 6K from 24 to 30p in an open gate format that uses the full height of the sensor. In contrast, the Sony ZV-E1 allows 1080 up to 240p and 4K up to 120p without cropping, making it preferable for slow motion, but it doesn't offer anything higher than 4K nor any open gate formats. So what is the benefit of open gate anyway? Okay, so most video modes take the full width of the sensor, but crop it vertically into a 16:9 shape that matches modern TVs. But most camera sensors are actually taller, typically 3:2 shaped. An open gate mode simply records the full area, giving you greater flexibility when editing. Here's a clip I filmed in open gate on the S9, initially cropped here for the usual 16:9 presentation, but notice how I have extra room above and below to pan up and down or reframe if necessary. I'm doing this in the edit. Now here's two versions of the same clip, shrunk down so you can see the full 3:2 shape that was captured. Next I'll crop each of them for 16:9 landscape or vertical framing, where you'll see the benefit of having extra headroom on the latter. It's way more flexible than cropping 16:9 footage into the vertical shape, and means you may only need to film one clip for multiple formats. Amazingly, for such a powerful feature, many camera companies, including Sony, have resisted equipping their consumer cameras with open gate facilities, and that gives the S9 and the S5 II a key advantage over their alpha rivals. And rather than only hiding it at the top of their movie quality menus, Panasonic has now decided to promote open gate as a key selling feature on the S9, with a new MP4 Lite mode that's designed for quick and easy transfer to phones. This records the full 3:2 sensor area, but at a lower 4K resolution to allow a more modest 50 megabit per second bitrate that's quicker to copy onto your phone as you saw earlier. There's no other quality options to set, just 30p or 25p depending on the region that you've chosen in the menus. Like the S5 II, the S9's video quality is excellent and also has very effective stabilization and continuous autofocus, allowing you to confidently stand in front of the camera and know that it's going to keep you nice and sharp. Let's have a quick look at the video quality in practice, starting with 1080 at 30p, before switching to 1080 at 60p. Now back to 1080 30p, before having a look at 4K 30p for a boost in detail. Then to 4K at 60p, which incurs an APS-C sized crop. And now back to 4K 30p again, before taking a look at 6K 30p, which may look the same when played on a 4K timeline, but see how you can zoom in a bit to exploit the extra detail that it captures while maintaining 4K quality. But the smaller body has involved compromises in recording times, with the S9 limiting 1080 clips to 20 minutes each, 4K clips to 15 minutes each, and 6K clips to 10 minutes each. In contrast, the S5 II has built-in cooling, which allows you to keep recording while power and memory remains, while the ZV-E1 has a menu option that allows the camera to get warmer if you like before it will shut down. Now in my tests I managed just under an hour of 4K on the ZV-E1 before it overheated, and that was with a single clip. On the S9 I recorded 5 consecutive 15-minute clips of 4K, so that's 75 minutes worth, before the temperature warning icon appeared. It then allowed me to film another 15-minute clip before shutting down with about 1/3 of a battery remaining. So in my test, the S9 actually gave me almost 50% more 4K recording time in total than the ZV-E1 before either of them shut down, but in 15-minute clips. For short videos this won't be a problem, but if you film presentations like this one, it could be limiting, so I do wish that Panasonic would add a temperature warning option that let you allow longer clips, even if only for half an hour. It should let you decide how hot it's going to get. Moving on, one of the most interesting new features on the S9 is hybrid zoom, which merges optical and digital zooms into a continuous, longer range, cleverly operated by the mechanical ring on the lens alone. This is available in photo and video, but works best of all on video, where you can effectively extend the zoom range in 1080 or 4K modes without losing quality by exploiting the full 6K resolution of the sensor. To demonstrate, here's the standard range on the 20-60 zoom, going from wide to long and back again. Note the focal length indicated in white. That means this is an optical process. And now for the hybrid zoom version, which simply appears to deliver a longer range that's still operated by the physical zoom ring alone. Note the focal length changing to yellow when processing is taking place. Here, with the camera set to 1080p, the 20-60 can be transformed into a 20-187mm range with seamless adjustments. Now this is more than just a standard digital zoom, which would simply multiply the entire range by the same factor, thereby losing out on the wide end. With the hybrid zoom, you're still getting the wide end, but an extra longer reach. And again, you're operating it with a physical twist of the zoom ring rather than pushing buttons on the back of the camera. Now if you'd like to preserve a fully optical zoom for the first few mil of the range, the S9 also offers an option that only begins to apply the digital aspect a little further in. On the 20-60, notice how it stays with optical only, indicated by white numbers, until 28mm, after which the digital kicks in. This may be preferable for the ultimate quality, but it does mean that you miss out on a linear zoom speed throughout the whole range. Instead, it appears to speed up on the digital version. Next, let's try it in 4K, where there's fewer spare pixels to use for scaling. This time the range is extended to 93mm, so not anywhere near as much as in 1080, but still roughly 50% further than the lens can do optically alone. Note that I've switched back to linear scaling here so that the zoom speed remains proportional to how I'm twisting the zoom ring. And finally, if I try it in 6K movie quality, it becomes unavailable because of course there's no spare pixels to work with. I really like the hybrid zoom for video as it extends the range of your zoom without any real loss of quality, at least in 4K or 1080 modes, but for still photos you will experience a reduction in quality. Now it remains seamless in operation, but you can't create detail out of thin air, and the longer end of the hybrid zooms just records images at a much lower resolution, for example at 1920 by 1280 pixels, that's just 2.5 megapixels. In fact, I compared 1920 by 1280 crops from full 24 megapixel images and found the detail was unsurprisingly the same. But the hybrid zoom will effectively preview that tighter framing at the time of capture, and it will also expose accordingly for that portion alone. Sometimes when you take a full image and you crop just a small part of it, the exposure isn't optimized for just that bit. That said, for the best quality, I'd only really use hybrid zoom for videos, where again the 1080 and 4K modes can exploit the full 6K resolution of the sensor to extend the range without impacting quality. Oh, and so far I've only tested it with a couple of Panasonic's own lenses, so I'll report back and let you know if it also works on Sigma's L-mount lenses and indeed the rest of the Panasonic range. Which now brings me to my final verdict, during which I'll include a selection of samples taken with a variety of lenses as promised. The Lumix S9 becomes one of the smallest and most affordable full-frame cameras around, similar in size to Sony's ZV-E1, but undercutting it on price while also sporting high-resolution photos and video. The core quality and autofocus, not to mention the excellent stabilization and decent battery, are mostly inherited from the S9 II, making it an effective tool for content creators. Pop a small lens on it and you've got a nice travel camera, almost like a full-frame X100. But like the ZV-E1, there are a number of compromises to meet the size and price point. Most obviously, both models lack a viewfinder, relying on their screens alone, and neither have the dual card slots nor mechanical shutters of the larger models that they're initially based on. Panasonic takes this even further still by imposing limits on the video clip length, just 15 minutes in 4K, while the accessory shoe on the top has no electrical contacts for dedicated microphones, and there's no headphone jack either. All features that are notably available on the ZV-E1, albeit at a higher price. And while the new 26mm lens is remarkably small, it's manual focus only with a fixed f8 aperture. If you want autofocus, you'll be fitting something larger, although Panasonic does have a compact 18-40 arriving later in the year that delivers an arguably more compelling range than Sony's 28-60 kit zoom. But with the increasingly discounted S9 II giving you a viewfinder, twin card slots, a mechanical shutter, flash sync, more controls, greater connectivity, and a bigger grip for not much more money, it may be initially hard to choose the S9 over it. But over time, I did grow fond of its looks, not to mention the easy access to LUT effects, the clever hybrid zoom, and the new MP4 Lite mode. I wonder how many of those features could arrive with a firmware update on the S9 II though. And while Sony's ZV-E1 may boast uncropped 4K up to 120p and a fun reframing mode, it does lack the 6K and Open Gate modes of the S9, which make that model much more practical to repurpose clips for both landscape and vertical formats. Meanwhile, mobile creators will also appreciate the S9's Light mode for quicker transfers to their phones. Ultimately, while it's not quite a full-frame X100 with interchangeable lenses, the Lumix S9 remains an attractive option for those who won't miss the features that are lost from the S9 II. Meanwhile, those who do want things like the viewfinder and twin card slots will be very well served by the S9 II, which is quite frankly remarkable value for what it offers. And if you're still in doubt whether Panasonic's autofocus and quality are good enough for single-person creators, you may find it reassuring that I've filmed almost all of my reviews over the past year with the S9 II, including this one. So tell me what you think of the S9 in the comments, and whether its reduced feature set versus the S9 II is no problem for you or a step too far. And while we're at it, what would you like to see on a future Lumix S flagship model? Surely that's going to be coming next. And in the absence of a sponsored section in this video, you can always help me out with a like and a follow, and if you're feeling extra generous, I'm always up for a coffee. Or you could treat yourself to my in-camera book, or a Camera Labs t-shirt. Links for everything in the description below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.